Iraq was supposed to rebuild after decades of war. Instead, many fear the country may once again become the battlefield of the Middle East. America, Iran, militias, sanctions, covert operations. Iraq now stands in the middle of forces far larger than itself. Tonight on Retired Spies Club, 5 retired spies share their honest personal verdicts on Iraq's dangerous future. Welcome back to Retired Spies Club. Tonight we're discussing Iraq, a country facing political paralysis, militia tensions, economic pressure, and growing regional instability. The new government formation remains fragile. U.S. sanctions on Iraqi militia-linked figures are increasing. Reports of covert Israeli operations inside Iraq continue circulating. Iran-backed groups remain deeply influential. So, how dangerous is the current situation really? Buck, let's begin with you.
Iraq is walking through a minefield right now. The new government is under enormous pressure from every direction. Washington wants Baghdad to reduce Iranian militia influence. Iran wants to maintain its network inside Iraq. Militias still operate with huge power. And meanwhile, ordinary Iraqis are exhausted. The government is trying to survive while balancing forces that fundamentally distrust each other. That's an extremely dangerous position. Add reports of covert Israeli activity and rising militia anger. And suddenly, Iraq risks becoming a regional pressure point again. I don't think most people realize how fragile the situation actually is.
Iraq is paying the price for geography and geopolitics. Powerful countries are once again treating Iraq as strategic territory rather than a sovereign nation. Washington is using sanctions and political pressure to weaken Iran's influence. Iran is using allied militias to protect its interests. Baghdad is trapped between them. The new government already looks weak before it fully forms. And when governments appear weak in the Middle East, armed groups become stronger. Iraq is not collapsing yet, but the country is drifting toward prolonged instability.
The situation is deeply concerning. Iraq continues suffering from the spillover effects of wider regional tensions. Political fragmentation remains severe. Economic confidence is weak. Security concerns remain widespread. Iraq's people need stability, investment, reconstruction, and development. Instead, the country risks becoming caught between competing external agendas. That is dangerous not only for Iraq, but for the entire region. Escalation rarely stays contained.
What concerns me most is how familiar this all feels. Iraq has spent decades trying to recover from cycles of invasion, insurgency, sectarian conflict, and external interference. Yet, once again, the country finds itself trapped inside a wider geopolitical contest. Government formation remains messy, sanctions are increasing pressure. Militias remain influential, and reports of foreign intelligence activity inside Iraq are deeply alarming. Fragile states rarely handle this kind of pressure well.
From a neutral perspective, Iraq is facing overlapping crises simultaneously: political instability, economic pressure, security fragmentation, external interference. Each problem intensifies the others. The difficulty is that Iraq cannot solve these issues independently while larger regional powers continue competing for influence inside the country. Stability requires both internal reform and external restraint. At the moment, neither appears sufficient.
Now for the difficult question. Who bears the greatest responsibility for Iraq's instability today?
Honestly, Iran-backed militias are one of the biggest problems. These groups undermine Iraq's government, intimidate opponents, and attack American interests while operating inside Iraqi territory. That weakens sovereignty immediately. Iraq cannot become stable while armed factions answer to outside powers. And let's be blunt, Tehran benefits from keeping Iraq dependent and divided.
No, Buck, that is far too simplistic. The United States also bears enormous responsibility. Years of military intervention, sanctions, political pressure, and external influence damaged Iraq deeply. Washington continues trying to shape Iraqi politics through economic pressure. You cannot endlessly pressure fragile governments and then act surprised when instability grows.
You can't ignore militias firing rockets and threatening the state.
And you cannot ignore sanctions hurting ordinary Iraqis.
Both external pressures are harming Iraq. Iran's militia influence creates security problems. U.S. sanctions create economic pressure. Iraq's sovereignty becomes weaker from both directions. The priority should be reducing escalation and allowing Iraq political space to stabilize itself.
Frankly, several parties deserve criticism. Iran for supporting armed militias, the United States for heavy-handed pressure tactics, Iraqi politicians for corruption and factionalism. Iraq's leadership has too often prioritized power struggles over national unity. External actors exploit those divisions. That combination is extremely dangerous.
From a neutral standpoint, I see systemic failure rather than one single culprit. Iraq remains structurally vulnerable. Weak institutions, deep factional distrust, external competition. Blame alone will not stabilize the country. Iraq needs enough political breathing room to rebuild genuine sovereignty.
Strong disagreements already. Buck, quick response?
Look, ordinary Iraqis deserve a government stronger than militias. That should not be controversial.
And ordinary Iraqis also deserve relief from endless sanctions and foreign pressure.
Escalation from either side increases instability.
And that brings us directly to the next question. What happens next? Let's look ahead. What do each of you predict for Iraq over the coming months?
I expect Washington to increase pressure on militia-linked politicians and armed groups. More sanctions are likely. The U.S. will push Baghdad harder to reduce Iranian influence. Government formation will remain difficult. Militias will continue testing state authority. American military assets in the region may quietly increase if attacks escalate. Iraq's economy will remain fragile, and politically, this government may struggle before it even fully establishes itself. I think volatility remains very high.
I predict prolonged paralysis. Iraq's government will struggle balancing between Washington and Tehran. Militia influence will remain deeply entrenched.
Economic recovery will stay slow under sanctions pressure. Russia and China may expand engagement with Baghdad as alternatives to Western pressure. Political fragmentation inside Iraq will continue worsening.
And frankly, I do not believe genuine sovereignty is close. Iraq remains too exposed to external competition.
I expect Iraq to continue attempting a balancing strategy. Baghdad will try maintaining relations with both the United States and Iran simultaneously. Diplomatic efforts to reduce tensions may increase. However, progress will likely remain slow. Militia activity will continue creating instability. Iraq's humanitarian and economic challenges will remain serious. International investment may hesitate due to security concerns. Long-term stability requires reducing external confrontation.
I suspect the political bargaining process inside Iraq will become increasingly difficult. Government formation may drag on longer than expected. External actors will continue influencing internal factions. European governments will watch nervously but probably avoid deep involvement. Oil markets will remain sensitive to instability. The risk of isolated violence remains high. And unfortunately, Iraq's institutions may face another severe stress test.
I expect limited short-term progress. Iraq's political system currently lacks enough trust for rapid stabilization. Economic pressure will continue building. External actors will keep competing for influence. Neutral mediation efforts may increase quietly. However, mistrust between factions remains extremely deep. Iraq's sovereignty will stay fragile for some time. Sustainable stability will require patience and compromise.
Anyone want to challenge another prediction?
Dimitri still underestimates how frustrated many Iraqis are with militia power.
And Buck still underestimates the damage caused by economic warfare.
Both pressures are destabilizing Iraq simultaneously.
And unfortunately, that takes us to the darkest question tonight. What is the true worst-case scenario for Iraq from here?
Worst case? Iraq descends into large-scale internal conflict again. Militias openly challenge the government. U.S. forces become directly involved. Sectarian violence spreads. Oil infrastructure gets targeted. Millions flee again. ISIS or similar extremist groups exploit the chaos. Iraq risks becoming a failed state for a second time.
The worst case is Iraq becoming a permanent proxy battlefield. The US and Iran escalate pressure through Iraqi territory. Militias attack foreign targets. Sanctions crash economics recovery. The government loses territorial control. Refugee waves destabilize neighboring countries. Regional powers intervene more aggressively. Iraq fractures politically and geographically.
The worst outcome would be total governance collapse. Humanitarian suffering would become catastrophic. Infrastructure destruction would intensify. Economic collapse could accelerate rapidly. Millions of civilians could be displaced. International aid delivery might become impossible. Regional instability would spread. Recovery could take decades.
For Europe and the wider region, complete Iraqi instability would be disastrous. Refugee flows would surge, terrorist organizations could regain momentum, oil disruption would shock global markets. Political consequences would spread across the Middle East. And sadly, we have seen versions of this before. It never ends cleanly.
The worst-case scenario is fragmentation. Multiple factions controlling different parts of Iraq. Severe economic collapse. Humanitarian catastrophe. Long-term proxy conflict. International institutions unable to respond effectively. Regional instability becoming permanent. Recovery taking an entire generation.
Very serious warnings tonight. Final thoughts before we close?
Iraq needs stronger sovereignty and weaker militia influence. A stable Iraq cannot exist while armed groups overpower the state. America should support Iraqi independence, not endless chaos. That's my honest view.
Iraq needs genuine independence from all external pressures. Sanctions and geopolitical competition are worsening instability. Foreign powers must stop treating Iraq as a strategic chessboard. That is my conclusion.
All external powers should respect Iraq's sovereignty. Iraq deserves stability, development, and peace. Dialogue and national unity remain essential. Escalation will only deepen suffering.
Patience and national reconciliation remain Iraq's best hope. Internal factions and external powers must both compromise. Iraq cannot survive indefinitely as a proxy battlefield. That is my honest assessment.
Practical compromise and reduced foreign interference are essential. Iraq needs time and space to rebuild genuine sovereignty. Stability benefits everyone in the long term. That is my personal view.
And that concludes tonight's discussion. 5 retired spies, 5 personal perspectives, no official positions, just honest reflections from long careers shaped by geopolitics, conflict, and diplomacy. Which spy's verdict did you agree with most? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoy deep geopolitical discussions with zero spin, subscribe and join the club. This is Cheesy Bond signing off. Stay safe, stay thoughtful, and we'll see you in the next episode.